I'm going to tell you a short story about two people with very different backgrounds but similar problems. The first person is a now famous actor for a popular comedy TV show. He is successful, smart, talented, and Black. When he first began to audition, he would audition with a British accent, despite the fact he was American. This is because when he would speak with his American accent, he would get asked to sound more urban. He'd get asked why he sounded so white. Now the second person, not a famous actor, just a teenager in high school. She was one out of 12 Black students, but she'd often get told, "You don't sound Black, you sound white. Are you sure you're Black?" And over time, with these comments, she eventually began to believe that she wasn't Black enough to be Black. The first person is Keith Powell, an actor for the TV show 30 Rock. And the second person is me. Keith Powell phrased this phenomenon when he said, being smart, Black, young, and American had become a liability. People seemed to think I was some kind of walking oxymoron. Christopher Bolton, a professor who specializes in the perception of race in media, explains that often it's as each and every person is seen to represent and be represented by all other Blacks. We are supposed to sound a certain way because that's the norm for Black people. And when someone doesn't, they don't quite meet the standard for Blackness. While many scholars have discussed the discrimination that comes with sounding Black, there's little that explores how the language expectations of others can influence how an individual feels about their identity, especially when they don't fit the Black language stereotype. That is where my research comes in, to explore the ideas and intentions behind these expectations and how they are manifested. I argue that these types of comments and attitudes can influence a disassociation in the Black identity. The underlying repercussions of style shifting combined with the ideology of sounding white and constant microaggressions that make themselves apparent in everyday situations can set the expectation for what being Black should be. And when someone doesn't meet that expectation, they can experience a lack of connection to their Black identity. To explore this argument, first we'll look at what Black people are expected to sound like, using Black English as an example. Then we'll look at the concept of style shifting, in addition to the ideology of sounding white. Then we'll analyze common microaggressions said to the Black community. Finally, we'll see how all these pieces fit together and how they might influence a lack of connection to the Black identity. Black English, also known as African American Vernacular, is a language used predominantly by African Americans. It is a language that has rules and is systematic, but it contains rules that are often seen as grammatical errors to American English. Therefore, it is seen as a sign of limited education, leading to discrimination in the workplace and schools. Despite this, many African Americans view this language as a symbol of their ethnic identity. Using this background, we'll look at the concept of style shifting. Style shifting is the ability for a speaker to change their style of speech, depending on the context. As a note, for the purpose of this research, whenever I refer to style shifting, I'll be talking about an African American changing their style of speech from Black English to American English. A popular example of this is former President Barack Obama. He was widely known for his ability to change his style of speech depending on the race of his audience. Although, in the book Articulate While Black, Professors Aleem and Smitherman analyzed that there is a double standard to this, as no one would expect a white candidate to sound Black to be taken seriously. While style shifting may seem like a choice, oftentimes it's not, as it's deemed unacceptable to speak Black English in most contexts. People are often forced to adapt this style of speaking in order to reach the expectation of acceptability and assimilate into society. As a consequence, people are often pushed to partially lose a sense of their identity altogether. With the concept of style shifting comes the idea of needing to sound Black because of the expectations of others, but also not wanting to sound too Black because of the discrimination that can come with it. Let's look at an example of this in media from the movie Sorry to Bother You.
You want to make some money here? Here's your white boys. White boys. I'm talking about Will Smith's wife, like this young love.
Hey, Mr. Kramer, this is Langston from Regal View.
Despite the satirical over-exaggeration of the voiceover by the white actor, we can see that this idea of a white-sounding voice not only exists, but is associated with success. This theme isn't uncommon among the Black community, as it's a trend seen often in television shows and comedy. This movie demonstrated that people were more willing to accept the friendliness of a white-sounding voice over a Black-sounding one. This is something that the Black community is aware of, as each and every person is seen to represent our entire race. So this is why style switching exists, why sounding white exists, to avoid the discrimination that comes with Black English, slang, or other cultural dialects associated with the Black stereotype. People can be pushed into this box where there's no room for individuality. So far, we've looked at how the expected reactions of others can influence the language one uses. Next, we'll look at how these outwardly expressed expectations in the form of microaggressions can influence how a person views their Black identity. A microaggression is a verbal, behavioral, or environmental indignity that communicates hostile or negative racial slights. Microaggressions can lead to a negative racial climate. To get a better understanding of this concept, let's look at some examples. You don't act like a normal Black person, you know? Why do you sound white? You're the whitest Black person I know. And you don't sound Black. These pictures, taken from projects done at Harvard in 2014 and Fordham University in 2013, demonstrates how frequent this can happen. There's not just one phrase that can denounce someone's identity. There's an abundance of them. To get a better understanding of the double meaning behind these, let's take a closer look at a well-known microaggression to the Black community, which is, "You're so articulate." To most people, this would be a compliment. But for the Black community, it has a history of being said with a different subtext. Prominent African American and linguistic professors observe that whites' use of articulate for Blacks conveys a subtext of amazement, even bewilderment, as if it's unexpected for a Black person to be so well-spoken. While whites often forget when the word has been used in reference to them, Black people can recall the number of times it has stopped them in their tracks. These microaggressions are so common that they appear in everyday conversation, yet they are glossed over as innocent or dismissed. Yet the effects of them are far from innocent. In a study that looked at how racial microaggressions affect racial attitudes, sociologists concluded that racial microaggressions appear to cue an effective disassociation with the racial status targeted by the microaggression, and that these microaggressions can weaken the feeling of closeness to one's own race. It is these phrases that set the expectation for what being Black should be. And when someone doesn't meet that expectation, they can lose a sense of who they are. We've explored the ideas of style shifting, sounding white, and microaggressions, and how all these factors can influence how an individual views their identity. While style shifting is an example of how the expectations of others can shape the language one uses, microaggressions, phrases that are the manifestation of other people's racial expectations, can create conflicting identities within the Black community. It is these factors that shape and perpetuate the unrealistic expectations that many people hold based on race. Expectations that a lot of people fall short of. So why is this important? When I was in high school, I thought I didn't meet the standards for being Black because of the way I spoke. I had this understanding that sounding white was better for everything, except my own racial identity. This is important because it is necessary to understand the effect that both spoken and unspoken racial expectations have for someone's identity. We can now see that these expectations aren't always direct, but exhibit themselves through microaggressions and have become so embedded in culture that there is a difference between sounding Black versus sounding white. There is little acceptance and celebration for people who do speak Black English, even though there should be. But there is also little acceptance for people who don't. Because of this, it is important to become cautious of these expectations and to try to not perpetuate them. I hope that by being able to recognize the effects of these, people can begin to understand that there is no set language standard for being Black, and there never should be. Thank you.